We're going to be talking about the bacterial disease known as cholera. This bacterial gastrointestinal infection targets the digestive system, but more specifically the small intestines.
Cholera is caused by the pathogen Vibrio cholerae and affects the digestive system. Cholera can be found anywhere, but it is most commonly found in developing countries where there is overcrowding and poor sanitation. Cholera outbreaks are a continuous cycle that starts with water and food that is contaminated by the pathogen. Feces of a contaminated person carries the cholera bacteria and can spread by getting into water supply, which then can spread into the soil, and it can be picked up by flies or even touched by fingers. These are all ways that the cholera pathogen can end up in food or water supply where it becomes ingested. For example, developing countries that don't have the proper sewage disposal system causes feces to be in their environment. When an infected individual's feces ends up in the environment, it can be picked up in any of the ways we discussed. Once the cholera pathogen is ingested, in this example through contaminated water, it goes through the mouth, through the esophagus, and into the stomach. In the stomach, the digestive enzymes break it down, and then it goes into the small intestine. The small intestine is where everything happens, and the cholera toxin is produced. After the small intestine, it goes through the large intestine and exits the body. Next, we're going to discuss what the cholera toxin does in the small intestine, which causes the disease.
To point out the pieces that we have here, we have the phospholipid bilayer of the plasma membrane. It's made of the hydrophilic heads and the hydrophobic tails. And all of that makes up the plasma membrane of the epithelial cells. Then we have the lumen of the small intestines, which is just the inner lining of the small intestines. And then we have the epithelial cells. And this is just where the plasma membrane is, and this is where the toxin will bind. Then we have the ion channels, the water molecules, and the chloride ions. Once the pathogen is ingested and reaches the small intestines, it releases the cholera toxin. Once the toxin is released in the small intestines, the toxin then binds to the receptors in the plasma membrane of the epithelial cells. This causes an increase in the number of cyclic AMP molecules, and then this increase causes the ion channels to then open. Once the ion channels are open, the chloride ions then leave the epithelial cells and travel into the lumen of the small intestines. This causes the water potential of the lumen to become lower than the water potential of the cells. The changes in the water potential levels then cause the process of osmosis to occur. And osmosis then causes the water molecules to leave the epithelial cells, and then they join the chloride ions in the lining of the small intestines. This then causes the body to have extreme water loss through the fecal matter, and this causes severe dehydration, which, if left untreated, can cause the body to shut down and can even lead to death in some cases. According to the CDC, cholera has approximately 3 to 5 million cases, and it causes about 100,000 deaths each year all around the world. The CDC also states that out of all the people infected with cholera, 1 in 10 of them will experience extremely severe symptoms. Untreated cases of cholera have a mortality rate of 50%, but with treatment, the mortality rate is less than 1%. This is why diagnosis is so important. It is almost impossible to distinguish a person with cholera from a person infected by another pathogen that also causes diarrhea. The most common way to diagnose cholera in areas where there is limited laboratory testing is using the crystal violet VC dipstick rapid test. This can provide public health officials with the warning that cholera is present and can cause an outbreak. According to the CDC, the most efficient way to diagnose cholera is by isolating and identifying Vibrio cholerae serogroup 01 or 0139. This is done by testing feces samples in the lab, using the selective thiosulfate citrate bile salts agar, also known as the TCBS plate. The symptoms that a person suffering from cholera may experience really varies, and it depends on each individual case. The most common symptoms can include diarrhea, vomiting, dizziness, rapid dehydration, and in some cases even death.
In parts of the world that don't have the access to the proper health care, cholera can kill within hours. These parts of the world have continuous cholera outbreaks because they lack the healthcare resources. Cholera can be easily treated with different methods. The loss of fluids due to the dehydration needs to be replenished. Treatment can vary and fluctuate based on the severity of cholera. According to the World Health Organization, up to 80% of people can be treated successfully using oral rehydration salts. Oral rehydration salts work by adding it to a glass of water and drinking it. The salts work to speed up the process of rehydrating the body. People that are severely dehydrated need to be administered intravenous fluids in order to rehydrate. The IV fluids replenish the body and replace all of the water lost through the feces. Vaccines would be the most beneficial in areas where cholera is common because it halts the spread. Vaccines can end the continuous cycle of infection. Antibiotics, unless specifically prescribed, are the least effective because they have no effect on the spread of cholera and can increase antimicrobial resistance. According to the World Health Organization, different measurements can be taken to prevent the spread of cholera. In parts of the world where cholera is commonly found, the development of piped water systems with water treatment facilities like chlorination can help filter out contaminants in the water. People being more aware and taking preventative measurements in their households, like using water filtration and having safe water storage containers, can help keep each household's water supply clean. In parts of the world that don't have proper sanitation conditions, the creation of proper sewage disposal systems can prevent the feces from contaminating the water supply. To summarize what we discussed in the video, cholera is a gastrointestinal disease that targets the small intestine. The toxin it produces causes severe dehydration, which is a big problem in poor countries. If these proper measurements are taken in the parts of the world that struggle with cholera, then there is hope for a future of clean water and no cholera.